Welcome, everybody, to Left Reckoning. My name is David Griscom. I'm really lucky and happy to be joined today by Austin DSA member, incredible organizer and activist, Seneca Savoie. How are you doing today, brother?
I'm doing a little bit better. The fundraising stuff is stressing the shit out of me. It sucks that you have to pay people to do campaigns.
Yes. It's certain, especially when our opponents have so much money and are more willing to, to shell out big dollars for this kind of stuff. We brought Seneca on today because we wanted to talk about what's happening in Austin, because the developments politically here are very interesting. One, just because it's a major city and this is going to affect a lot of folks, but these are sort of stories that are becoming general trends across the country. So we're going to talk about, we did an episode on TMBS that I highly suggest people check out, where I interviewed Seneca about the fight for defunding the police in Austin, and specifically the tactics with which they were able to achieve significant cuts to the police budget in the city. So definitely check that out if you're interested in the kind of tactics. But I wanted to paint the picture for folks because we've been able to see some of the benefits of, where that money has been diverted, specifically when it comes to housing houseless folks in Austin. So we want to talk about that a little bit to show folks, what there is to celebrate and fight for, because that victory is now under threat. And we wanted to talk about why it's under threat and how we can beat that. But just first, Seneca, would you mind just sort of painting the picture for folks who might not be familiar with Austin? Not so much the defund the police stuff, but basically, being able to house people in hotels and those movements to basically, house folks who are threatened with, chronic houselessness.
Yeah, so the progress on that has been kind of an arc. So I think it goes back even further than defunding the police. In 2018, Austin passed the largest affordable housing bond in Texas history, and Austin DSA served as the entire field team for that. So every door that was knocked by us, and that had given the city a really big land banking capacity, right? So it was a $250 million affordable housing bond, and that gives a lot of liquidity to the city.
Mm-hmm.
And then we come into the our defund summer, and now we have, in addition to that, pools that will be available each year, right? Because reductions in overtime and staffing are ongoing. I'm gonna quit Slack. All right, that's
definitely... And that's the sound of most of our lives these days.
Yeah, so is the combination of those two wins together that really made this possible, right? Because you can get land with your bond, but if you want to actually successfully permanently house folks, you need services, right? So the services need ongoing. You can't pay for that stuff with a bond. And so the ability to actually have wraparound services, right? So to take the potential energy of that affordable housing bond and turn it into actual supportive housing was because of defund, right? It all opened up pools of ongoing cash that could be used for services. And that part wasn't super expensive, right? We just needed money that was going to be there. So, the ones that actually happened, it failed a bunch of times before that, right? Through very straightforward, like normal everyday NIMBYism. And what happened with the previous hotels, because we were already operating a bunch of hotels as part of our COVID strategy, right? So that people would be able to quarantine if they lived in multi-person household. Bringing those online as permanent supportive housing, right, encountered some resistance, which was very weird, right? Because you say, I'm going to bring a bunch of people with a potentially lethal disease and put them right by there. That's fine. But you switch it around to, I'm going to put some people experiencing homelessness, which is not communicable, in the exact same building, and people freak out, right? So with the hotels people heard about, what was different is we had an organizing push, right? Particularly in in collaboration with local advocates, service providers, and Councilman Hazar, we made a deliberate plan to basically bring these things forward, right, and to champion their use to the to champion their use to the community. Now, at the same time, though, this was happening right when Save Austin Now was putting out their second run at their petition.
Mm-hmm.
And Mackenzie Kelly had just gotten into Austin City Council. For those not familiar, Mackenzie Kelly is the lone Republican. She replaced Jimmy Flanagan, and she was the one who has like all the pictures with members of the Proud Boys and things like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
For Richie and others.
And she got elected in a pretty strange way, correct?
Yeah, so she had a runoff election in District 6, which has a lot of Republicans, but it's because it's a runoff election, relatively low turnout.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a bunch of people running in the first round, right? So nobody got anywhere near a bare majority. And so essentially the anti-homeless campaign became her campaign
Mm-hmm.
in North Austin.
Mm-hmm. And that's Save Austin Now for folks who aren't familiar, which has been a pretty nasty front. But because there were a bunch of stories when we were first talking about jumping into this about the I feel what is in the appeal about the success of these programs. How was the early rollout?
Yeah, so at council fairly easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have the earlier rollouts, like in policy wise, were very successful at preventing people from dying of COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
A number of people going to those hotels were homeless. There were some issues we need to sort out, right? There was basically too much security at these hotels. So if you had a bunch of people who are experiencing homelessness in version 1.0 of these, is like, this kind of feels like a jail.
Mm-hmm.
But that began rolling back over time, and then we had a workable model, and it was saving people's lives, right? Very demonstrably, we can show that there are a lot of people who are alive right now because they were able to quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't spread it to the broader community. We also see for people who did not get access to it, that deaths in Austin amongst folks experiencing homelessness were pretty extreme last year. 254 people experiencing homelessness died in Austin in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Jesus. And I think we should start to to get into the onslaught that y'all are facing now. But just again, for folks who aren't familiar too, central to this is the question of what they call a camping ban, which essentially, and I think it's worth explaining this in as clear as terms as possible, because I think the last time some people were confused as to like what that means. But in the bluntest possible terms, it essentially just criminalizes, not having a place to sleep, right? Because, anyone who is just sitting outside with stuff can be harassed by the police, which sort of puts you in a situation where you can't, do much else, right? Because you get fined for not having a place to sleep, then you get in trouble because you can't pay the fine, and then can face potentially jail time, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
That got overturned in Austin.
Yeah, so that we were successfully able to roll back in 2019, and frankly, not even as rolled back as probably would have liked. The basic, we replaced the no soliciting with a terroristic threat, or like no aggressive harassment, right? We replaced no camping with your camping can't interfere the use of a public with the use of a public good, right? So you can't make a sidewalk unusable or something like that, right? And that still leaves quite a lot of latitude for officers, right? But the one they want to bring back is very expansive, right? So the Boise ban that was overturned in the Ninth Circuit is much less restrictive than the one that Austin had, right? Similar to Denver, right, where it says you can't build a structure and have the structure be there semi-permanently, right?
Hmm.
It's referring to putting up tents and things like this, which people should still be able to do. But the Austin one is much harsher than that. Specifically, if you have your possessions with you and you rest with them, that's it. And it's not the citation happens if you don't move; it happens when you sit down, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
so I think that it's very important that we don't refer to these as camping bans, right? Because it's banning sitting in line, it's banning
Hmm.
soliciting, and it's banning things that you wouldn't think of as camping, right? Just falling asleep to your backpack, falling
Hmm.
asleep in the car. All these things are camping under this ordinance, right? So that's not a ban in camping; that's a ban on sleep.
Hmm. Yeah. And yeah, again, and this, this is just kind of like basic humanity stuff. Like, again, we're not even talking about at this point, radical socialist like solutions to these things. We're just saying, let's not let the police be able to have just wide latitude to harass people. And
So this was
so,
actually
yeah.
in the training
Mm,
for the academies, right? So the way thing I always analogize it to is if you ever worked like a terrible retail job, you'll hear this phrase like if you've got time to lean, you've got time to clean, or something to that effect.
yeah.
And that was basically the attitude in the academy for last several years with regards to these homeless citations, right? So
Mhm.
there's an expectation of productivity, and if an officer couldn't find something else to do, they're explicitly told you should go cite homeless people,
Oh
right?
my
This is
God.
like
Yeah.
your busy work activity, right? Is
Hmm.
you should go look for people violating these ordinances and then go give them citations. Um, so yeah, like it was literally if you're bored, go harass the homeless.
No, I mean that's yeah, exactly, and yeah, it's just it's really horrendous and ghoulish. And like speaking of ghouls, let's talk about this organization that is now trying to implement, as you were saying, the harshest possible anti-homeless measures and basically fight back all of these things. And I want to highlight this again that were won through organizing, but also through winning, mass democratic, elections, right? Questions that were brought to the people of Austin. Now they're basically trying to undermine that completely, and they're being very sneaky about their tactics. So I guess like first, maybe let's talk about that campaign, and
Mm.
then maybe second, let's talk about the main players behind it.
Yeah, so the I guess we can distinguish
Like
between.
what? Yeah, well, like what's coming up soon in May, for example.
Yeah,
Probably.
so in May, they have the signatures and they have put in for this May election to recriminalize homelessness. All the behaviors I talked about over a physically larger area than we started with, and with council being unable to make any changes for 5 years.
Hmm.
So to put in context, if these ordinances were in place over the last year, right? Our expectation is that the deaths from folks living outside would have roughly doubled from COVID, right? Because it would have been harder to get folks in quarantine because you literally couldn't find them. Um, that we probably would have seen the week of the snowpocalypse in Austin, we probably would have seen 200 to 300 people die, right? Because one of the things that made Austin Mutual Aid so successful, along with Street Forum, was that they were able to easily find large numbers of people experiencing homelessness and then get them to warming shelters or hotels, right?
Hmm.
And the fact that you could go to like a set of centralized points, you knew where they were, and you could take a van and then take the people in that van to shelter, like kept, they organized without, the state or the city helping,
Hmm.
roughly 500 people getting off
Wow.
the street for that entire week. Um, and that would have been impossible, right, if these people
Hmm.
were geographically dispersed. Um, so this is kind of the thing that's on the ballot. To keep in mind, a May ballot is an incredibly low turnout election. Um, I think that the average prediction I've seen is like a 25,000 turnout. But maybe at the high end, right? If we were to index against the Uber election from a few years ago,
Hmm.
maybe 100,000 people, right? There's 850,000 registered voters in Austin.
Yeah.
So we're in a position where an extremely rich, extremely white electorate could be deciding, the fate of people experiencing homelessness.
Hmm. And it just had this story has to be told that um when you're talking about that potential electorate too, if you're in Austin or if folks are in in Austin, it is very interesting to hear people's opinions on, like, like the homeless crisis in the city, and particularly super wealthy people don't like, the again, I understand what you're saying about, like, not saying decriminalization, but just not allowing the police to be able to harass folks, letting people build up, some temporary shelters and things like that. They don't like it because, one, they don't want to see, poor folks, and two, they're worried it's going to affect property values. And Austin is a town where almost every neighborhood right now is like a huge investment opportunity, right? So there really is not many places, that you could sequester, the houseless problem too, right? So you have to understand that, like, not only is this just like, okay, this is a basic human question, but a lot of these folks who are advocating against it have, very serious real estate interests, behind them as well.
Yeah, if I were to take a Venn diagram of the people who advocated against building the or acquiring the additional hotels earlier this year, and people who are Save Austin Now supporters, it would just be a circle, right? Which is very important because, like, their entire narrative is that by implementing this, they will force the city to come up with real solutions, right?
Hmm.
But that would indicate that they're like, we need to make sure that housing is available instead of camping, and then we'll use the stick to get people into the housing.
Hmm.
But they're also against the housing, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and it seems inconsistent, but it's actually incredibly consistent, right? Because if your value set is that homeless people are not human and shouldn't be
Hmm.
allowed to be nearby you, then both the enforcement and not allowing any shelters or permanent supportive housing to be built in your neighborhood, right? That's a very consistent world.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, it's exactly what happens when we turn, social needs like housing into commodities, right? You just complete, it makes people have pretty, it makes people make really wicked calculus, but it also creates really perverse, like, incentives and interests for folks too, right? Because if so many people, like, that is like their asset, is their house, they will actually, like, be willing to see, just absolutely inhuman things happen to other folks to protect their own. And it's something that we have to push back, both politically, but also, personally. But let's talk about the kind of political actors now too, behind this move.
Yeah, so there are, I think, three chairs on Save Austin Now, and one of them is a decoy, basically.
Hmm.
Uh, so Matt Makoviak is the chair of the Travis County Republican Party. He was basically the mastermind behind Mackenzie Kelly's campaign. Uh, he also tried to fly to Miami in the middle of Snowvid. He tried to get other people to crowdsource him flying to Miami.
Deeply
Uh,
rooted in our community.
uh, and how it was a war crime that his house was at 58 degrees. It's too cold. When the power went out
Yeah,
for
I know. Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of other people.
Jesus Christ.
um, and so Matt essentially is the bankroller of this. He goes to all of the interviews, all of these things, right? And there's this thin veil that this is a bipartisan organization because there's a person in Cleo Patricic that is also on the board, who's listed as a Democratic activist, but who has not been active in any campaigns, is not active in any clubs, et cetera, right? And the Democratic Party, of course, has its own issues as an institution, but, like, the
Hmm.
fact you voted for Joe Biden does not put you in the middle of of the institutional apparatus or community. Uh,
Hmm.
so then the third, of course, is Ken Cassaday, who you may remember from his lack of neck or from when he went on. He's the president of the Austin Police Association, so he has defended quite a number of
Hmm.
police shootings and non-police ones, like when Garrett Foster was shot. He's the person who went on national TV, said that Garrett got what he deserved. So this is kind of the pack of people
Hmm.
that we're dealing with.
And because it has to be said time and time again that one of the most ironic aspects, um not ironic, but a funny aspect of this has been how much they try to push that this is like a nonpartisan or bipartisan institution, right? And you're saying their offices, right? Aren't they near or inside of a GOP office?
It's literally the address of the Travis County. Um, uh,
I don't know. It just is funny when you talk to folks that they're like, well, this actually isn't a political issue. We're actually just dealing with, with our, which is, obviously that is every ghoul's, favorite line to use is like, oh, this isn't a political issue. So, you can leave the politics at the door when obviously all of these questions are extremely political. And the fact that the GOP is using this, and I was hearing you when you're on the majority report mentioning, the GOP is trying to use this to like, excite their base to show up and vote as well. And obviously, you're seeing the police interest in this as well. These aren't neutral actors who just all woke up today and like, it's time to reach across the aisle. These are folks who have very much vested interest in demonizing the poor, and in trying to oppose any kind of supportive housing, availability, folks, and also trying to undo everything that the people in the city of Austin decided that they wanted to do regarding the police.
yeah, and I think it's all part of a plan to try to split away, right, your landowning or professional
Hmm.
managerial class um, Democrats away from like the core coalition, right, within
Hmm.
Austin. Um, right, is to try and make people who have homes who are really really scared about their home value, right, and who have deliberately constructed their communities as being a part, right, is saying that that's not part of it. And
Hmm.
uh, I think there is some merit to the idea that maybe the Democratic coalition is not for all the people that are under it right now. But I think if there's anyone who is quite well represented by Democratic coalitions in Austin, it is definitely white landowning homeowners in West Austin.
Yeah, and look, and that's not to broaden out too much, but it needs to be said. We had Matt Carp on the show last week, and we were sort of talking about the breakdown of the Biden coalition. It is smart strategy for the right to do this kind of stuff because the Biden coalition, of course, Biden doesn't win in Texas, but when we're talking about Austin, we're talking about a city that was very much represented, in Biden's like vote share here, right? And it's the same thing outside of Atlanta. It's the same thing in all of these other states. What they're trying to build with this Biden coalition is extremely dangerous, for the left because they really are leaning into this, higher income property owning class of folks, who might not like, the kind of the Republican brand essentially. Um, and it's something that, and I want to pivot to what y'all are doing, organizing, to prevent this from happening. But it's just something that we have to note, as you were saying. It's like the Democratic coalition, first of all, thinking that there's a community of Democratic voters means that we're going to get positive social outcomes. I think most people listening to the show understand why that's BS. But it's also very important to note, that these are the kind of shifts that we are seeing, and these are the splinter points, the areas of access for the forces of like gentrification and capitalism, real estate industry, to come at that Biden voter. And it could be very dangerous in the future if, like, the Democratic Party, for example, says, okay, well, but that is our coalition, right? So we are going to listen to them, right? This is why doing the work that y'all are doing right now is really important, to try to nip this in the bud before it develops into something
Yeah,
unstoppable or too rooted.
it's also really important in terms of like persuasive strategy, to be able to understand like the functions of like axes of oppression
Hmm.
as like splintering of communities or coalitions, right? Because the ignoring the sentiment
Hmm.
and just trying to focus on something else altogether is not super helpful.
Hmm.
Over moralizing about the sentiment, why are you such a shitty NIMBY, all this stuff, it is
Hmm.
completely ineffective. But when you identify somebody as part of a community, right, sees themselves as part of that, you name an outside actor and point out that they are using that
Hmm.
tool as a means to splinter that community. That
Hmm.
is super
Hmm.
effective, right? That's a whole other thing. But like, the kind of work that's been done around like the race class narrative project is really effective in terms of how to disarm uh,
Hmm.
folks, you know, the ways in which all of these divisions of the working class happen, right? So it's super important for us to call out that this is specifically a tool, name who is inside and who is outside the community, right?
Hmm.
In terms of like how we imagine ourselves as Austin, or hopefully as the working class.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely spot on, and we should definitely have. It might be fun one day to have a kind of general conversation about that strategy and work through that. But I want to make sure that we're talking. So we've set the stage. We
Mhm.
understand what was good, what's under threat, and who's threatening it. But let's talk about the organizations that are trying to stop this ballot initiative from going through. How people can get involved both in Austin and also nationally.
Yeah. So on day one, it was basically just Austin DSA, right? Like
Hmm.
the Homes Not Handcuffed pack hadn't even been set up yet, so we are like, fuck, let's reactivate our pack real quick. We have a treasurer on that. Um, and then we started organizing events, and we got a few nonprofit partners to in-kind some tools to us so that we could start making calls. So we have been having volunteer run phone banks basically twice a week since this thing got going.
Wow.
Um, we've called a little over 38,000 folks. Um, and we need to talk to a whole lot more, right? Because those are dials, not the connecteds. Um, and we've gone ahead and texted with, I guess I should go into the rest of it. So that started off, then we get Homes on Handcuffs actually brought up, which was, just a website and some stuff for a little bit, right? That
Mhm.
was collaborating with Austin DSA, but is now grown into an actual coalition, right? So I don't want to say everybody I'm going to list is like in the coalition, but these are groups that have endorsed against Prop A, and
Mhm.
a lot of them have done like some field activities. So Working Families Party has, basically brought in some of their digital tools, their state volunteer team, um, and about 100,000 texts worth of resources. Grassroots Law Project was able to help us get started with our first weekend of Dialer. Mike Siegel
Mhm.
co-hosted our first weekend of calls, which was very successful because we called his supporters.
That's great.
Julie Oliver is going to be co-hosting our Canvas on Sunday.
Mhm.
We have Austin Indivisible has joined, the UT Dems. Travis County Democratic Party is finally moving a little bit harder. The snow situation kind of put a wrench in the works for a moment.
Mhm.
We were able to organize to make sure that there was a standing resolution at the county party last year against this, so that we would be able to take action now. Hopefully that will pay some fruit. Sunrise Austin, of course, has been a rock here. They are dedicating about 52 hours of work
Wow.
to this every week, um, and that list is growing. Um, we expect to be adding more clubs every week. We're going to bring a resolution before the CLC. Um, but and then of course a few other social justice organizations, District 5 for Black Lives, Bend the Arc Austin, which is a Jewish social justice organization,
Mm.
um, and we're hoping to add on to that in the following weeks. We're going to have basically we're going to work with the local party to draw a line in the sand and be like, look, if you are on the other side of this, you're with the Republicans on this.
Mhm.
Is
Mhm.
not my ideal method of agitation, but at this point is important, right? Because we kind of have to make sure that people know they can't defect.
Mhm.
Uh, and in terms of the actual activities, like we're going to try and put together the biggest field that you can in a month, basically, or 6 weeks. We're going to be knocking the densest parts of Austin, the highest turnout parts of Austin. We're going to try to call hundreds of thousands of people, text hundreds of thousands of people. That's going to cost some money.
Mhm.
But we have hundreds of volunteers who, if we get that, right, if we get, to put in context, um, to use an auto dialer, which is like way better than doing a virtual phone bank, right? Virtual
Mhm.
phone banks are hard. We've been grinding them out and getting some success. But when we use a dialer, Um, for every $5,000 we have, we can make 100,000 dials.
Hmm.
If we like we raise another 5,000 or so, we bring 50 people on 2 calls, and we make a pass through list, and we're probably going to talk to 3 to 4,000 people in a weekend, right? Which is way more, right? And by comparison, what the opposition is doing is they're spending some money on some texts, they're spending some money on advertisements and on yard signs,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a lot of money. They're raising $500,000.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow.
so we have to actually talk to and confirm people, because in a low turnout election, the way you win is by actually organizing, which means
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have conversations where we do all the stuff you learn in the Jane McAlevey books, um, address people's concerns, and then get hard commits to come out. And this is part of a larger arc too, right? We're not trying to just win this election. We know that there's another budget fight coming up this summer, so that means we have to be doing preparatory action for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why just the don't listen to them or Republicans gets our foot in the door, but then we have to do actual political education. Otherwise, nobody's going to show up this summer, right?
Mm-hmm. Man, and just we'll put these in the descriptions, but just want to make sure that people know where to look to be able to donate, to help fund these operations.
Yeah, let me go ahead and pull up those links for you real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So our website is No on Prop B, and I'll go ahead and put that here.
Thank you.
And the donate link, direct blue.
Yeah, pretty direct title. I like that. So we'll be putting these all up for folks in the YouTube description. Also, if you're listening to on podcast, I will try to make sure that we get them, but we'll also tweet things out. So you'll be able to find these for sure.
Oh, and I don't have the link on me right now. So there is a third link of relevance. So National DSA did go ahead and endorse,
Wonderful.
which means they now have a link where you can donate and split amongst every municipal campaign that National DSA is endorsed. So that's if you want to do some movement building, although if you think Austin is the most important place in the world, I'm fine with that too. But that's another option too. And I forgot to mention, Our Revolution is also going to be seeking national endorsement, which
Wonderful.
means we may have an opportunity in the near future to set up a dialer where they're going to call every Bernie supporter in Austin.
Wow.
And their verified list of Bernie supporters in Austin is about 30,000 deep, which means we're slacking, right? Because there's only about 2,200 members of Austin DSA. So where's the other 2,800?
There's a big base, yeah.
People, yeah.
It will come. It will come. Well, Seneca, this has been a really great conversation. Very happy to have you and all the great folks at Austin DSA on the front lines, fighting for the community and for everybody. I'm sure we'll be having more conversations down the line, and we'll make sure that everyone knows where to go to support the fight.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you.